There is a specific kind of silence that happens in a room full of people when someone does something no one expected. Not the silence of shock, exactly. Something slower. The silence of 200 people recalibrating simultaneously, updating what they thought they knew about the woman standing at the front of the room. I know what that silence sounds like now. I know it because I caused it. On my wedding day, at my own reception, in front of my new husband's entire family, who had spent the previous 6 hours making it very clear that they did not consider me worthy of the man I had just married. My name is Priya Anand Morrison. I'm 33 years old. I was born in Chennai, raised in New Jersey, and on the 14th of September, I married a man named David Morrison in a ceremony that his family attended with the energy of people who had been handed a court summons rather than a wedding invitation. I want to tell you about that day. All of it. The ceremony, the silence I kept, and the moment at the reception when I stopped keeping it. But first I need to tell you about the 18 months that came before. David and I met through a mutual friend at a dinner party in the way that people sometimes still meet. Accidentally, over bad wine and a debate about something neither of us can remember now, with no algorithm involved. He was the kind of person who argued with genuine curiosity rather than the need to win, which I found unusual enough to stay interested. He had dark hair going silver at the temples, which he was self-conscious about and which I thought was the most distinguished thing about him. We exchanged numbers at the end of the night, and he texted 2 days later, not immediately, not a week later, 2 days, which told me something about his particular kind of patience. We were together for 4 months before he told me about his family. Not that they existed, I knew that much. He had mentioned his parents, Richard, and Carolyn Morrison in passing, his older brother, Will, his younger sister, Kate. The broad strokes of a family that had lived in Connecticut for 3 generations, that had opinions about certain schools and certain clubs and certain ways of doing things. What he told me on a Tuesday evening at my apartment with the careful seriousness of someone delivering information they wish they didn't have to deliver was that his family had expectations about who he would marry, about what that would look like, about the fact that it had, for the previous 37 years of his life, looked a particular way, which is to say, it looked like someone from a family his family already knew, already understood, already considered part of the correct category of people. I am Tamil. My parents came from Chennai in the 1980s. My mother is a retired biology teacher, and my father owns 2 dry cleaning businesses in Parsippany. We are not from a family his family already knew. I need you to understand that before you meet them, he said. I appreciate you telling me. It doesn't change anything for me, he said. I want to be clear about that. I know, I said, and I did know. I had known David for 4 months, and I was already certain of that particular thing about him, his clarity about what he wanted and why. It was one of the things I loved about him. But I also want to be honest, he said, that it may be difficult. Difficult turned out to be a modest word for it. I met Richard and Carolyn Morrison for the first time at a dinner at their home in Greenwich, 8 months before the wedding. The house was the kind of house that makes a statement before you walk in, large without being ostentatious, old without being decrepit, full of the particular confidence of things that have been in place for a long time and expect to remain that way. Carolyn met us at the door. She was slim and precise, late 60s with the controlled warmth of a woman who knew every social rule ever written and deployed them with the accuracy of long practice. She embraced David. She turned to me. "Priya," she said, "how lovely." A pause that lasted perhaps half a second longer than necessary. What an unusual name. My name is not unusual. My name is one of the most common Tamil names in existence. But I smiled and said it was lovely to meet her and followed her inside. That dinner was the first of 9. 9 dinners over 8 months in which I was subjected to the slow, careful, entirely deniable work of a family communicating that I was not what they had in mind. It was never loud. It was never rude in any way that could be directly quoted. It was questions about my parents' work phrased with a particular emphasis that turned them into assessments. It was Carolyn asking about my background in the way that people ask when they want to know things they can use as evidence. It was Will, the older brother, talking over me consistently enough that I began to track it. 4 times in one dinner, 5 in another, as though my sentences were suggestions rather than contributions to the conversation. At the 3rd dinner, Carolyn mentioned, in the context of discussing a charity event, that a close family friend's daughter had been dating someone from a very different background and that it had been complicated. She said this to the table at large, looking at no one in particular. Nobody responded. Nobody was supposed to respond. It was the kind of sentence that functions as a weather report, simply stating conditions, not inviting commentary. At the 5th dinner, Will asked David in front of everyone whether they were planning to move closer to the family. He did not ask me. He asked David. As though the answer was David's to give, as though my professional life and my preferences and my family, who also existed in the world with addresses and opinions, were not variables in the equation. I gave Will the answer, which he received with mild surprise, as though a piece of furniture had spoken. It was Kate, the younger sister, who was the most direct. She had the specific confidence of someone who has always been the most beloved person in every room she entered and has not yet encountered a reason to question this. She asked me once, at the 6th dinner, with a curiosity so genuine that I almost admired it, "Do you ever feel like you're from a very different world from David?" The table went quiet. I looked at her. I thought about every honest answer I could give. I thought about the 18 months of navigation I had already done, the smiling and the patience and the careful management of what I showed and didn't show. All couples come from different worlds, I said. That's what makes it interesting. She smiled, moved on, made no indication that she had heard her own question. I told David on the drive home. He listened with the focused stillness he had when something troubled him. "I'm sorry," he said. "Don't apologize for her." "I'm apologizing for not saying something at the table." I looked at the highway outside the window. "Next time." He did say something at the 7th dinner. When Will talked over me for the 3rd time in an hour, David said quietly and clearly, "Will, Priya was talking." The table paused. Will looked at his brother, said, sorry, without looking at me, and the conversation moved on. It was a small thing. It was not a small thing. We got engaged in April. Carolyn responded to the news with what I had come to recognize as her version of enthusiasm, a warmth that was real but fitted, like a dress that had been tailored for someone else. Richard shook my hand. Will posted something on social media that referenced David finding his person without using my name. Kate texted me directly. "So excited. We're going to have so much fun planning." The planning, as it turned out, was its own education. I want to be fair to Kate, because fairness matters to me even when it's inconvenient. She was not malicious. She was something more complicated. A woman so completely inside her own frame of reference that she genuinely could not see outside it. When she said, "We're going to have so much fun planning," she meant it. She wanted to have fun. She wanted flowers and tastings and venues and the satisfying machinery of a wedding she could recognize. What she wanted, I understood quickly, was a wedding that looked like the weddings she had grown up attending, which meant certain things and not other things, which meant a preference, stated delicately but consistently against the elements of my culture that David and I had discussed, including, against the ceremony I had envisioned, against the wedding my mother had been imagining since I was small. The planning had its own texture. Every meeting was pleasant. Every meeting had a moment inside it that required me to decide, address this now or hold it. I became, over 5 months of planning, a woman with very precise internal accounting, a running ledger of what had been said and done and implied and left out. There was the florist meeting where Carolyn had come along, uninvited but present, and had quietly steered me away from marigolds. Marigolds are what I had wanted since I was a girl. The flowers at every celebration of my childhood, the color of festivals and ceremonies, the thing that said home to me before I could put it in words. She had called them a bit much for this particular venue, and pointed instead to arrangements of cream roses and white hydrangea that would have been lovely at a different wedding. I had smiled. I had said, "I'll think about it." I had chosen the marigolds, and they were on every table at the reception, and they were the most beautiful thing in the room. There was the rehearsal dinner, which the Morrisons hosted, at which I was seated between two of Carolyn's friends, who had known each other for 4 decades and who conducted their conversation across me with the fluid ease of people who have never been required to make room. They asked me at intervals where I was from and what I did, the polite intake questions, then returned to each other. For 2 hours. I ate my dinner and smiled when looked at and filed everything quietly in the place I had been filing things for 18 months. "I just think," Kate said at our 3rd planning meeting, tilting her head with the gentle concern of someone delivering difficult news for your benefit, that mixing too many elements can feel a little busy, visually. We were discussing whether to incorporate any aspect of a traditional Tamil ceremony alongside our civil ceremony. We'd already scaled it back considerably. We were not asking for a full traditional wedding. We were asking for a single element, a moment of acknowledgement. "I think it would be beautiful," I said. Of course. David, what do you think?" The pivot to David. This was the move I had noticed across months, when my preference became an obstacle, redirect to David, as though his endorsement would either validate or overrule mine, as though my opinion about my own wedding was provisional pending his confirmation. "I think whatever Priya wants," David said, "is what we're doing." Kate smiled, beautifully, said, "Of course," and did not return to the subject directly again. What she did instead was raise it with Carolyn, who raised it with David in a separate conversation, who told me about it that evening with a tiredness that I recognized, the tiredness of someone who has been managing this dynamic for his entire life and had hoped, this once, not to have to. "What did you say?" I asked. "I said we're incorporating it. I said the conversation is finished." "Good. I'm sorry, Priya. Stop apologizing." "I'm going to keep apologizing until my family stops doing things that require it." "Then you'll be apologizing for a long time." He smiled. It was a tired smile. It was also a true one. We incorporated the element. A single blessing spoken in Tamil from my grandmother, who had flown from Chennai and who cried for 3 consecutive days before the wedding from happiness and had to be rationed tea. The Morrison family was informed of this. Their response was, collectively, the silence of people who have decided to accept something they cannot change. I built the wedding I wanted, mostly, with David. I made choices that mattered to me, and I made them clearly, and I did not apologize for them. What I also did was notice, carefully, quietly, everything that happened in the weeks and days leading up to the ceremony. I noticed the guest list suggestion from Carolyn that removed 2 of my college friends to accommodate cousins on the Morrison side. I addressed it, and they were put back. I noticed the seating chart that placed my parents at a table near the back of the reception hall behind 2 other tables, while Richard and Carolyn's friends occupied the front. I addressed it, and my parents were moved. I noticed that in the printed program, which Kate had offered to manage and which I had reviewed in draft twice, my grandmother's name was misspelled. Not dramatically, 1 letter transposed. The kind of thing that can happen, except that every Morrison name on the same program was correct. Every one. I had checked. I did not address this one. I made a note of it. There are things you address and things you hold. By the morning of my wedding, I had a very clear sense of which was which. The 14th of September was warm and overcast, the kind of early fall day that can't decide what it wants to be. The venue was a restored estate outside the city. David had found it. I had loved it immediately, and for once there had been no debate. I got ready with my mother and my best friend, Sunita, who had been my closest friend since the 7th grade, and who had the specific talent for making things feel manageable that I have relied on since we were 12. My mother put flowers in my hair herself, the way she had told me she would since I was small. I watched her face in the mirror while she did it, concentrated, careful, happy with the specific quality that parents have at the moments they have been working toward for a long time. "You look beautiful," she said, in Tamil, and then again in English, for Sunita's benefit. I looked at myself in the mirror, white dress, flowers in my hair, the small gold earrings that had been my grandmother's. I looked like myself. That felt important. The ceremony began at 4 o'clock. I will not tell you everything that happened, because some of it is private and some of it belongs only to David and me. What I will tell you is what I noticed from the moment I walked down the aisle. Carolyn, seated in the front row, was wearing cream, not white, not bridal, but cream. A pale ivory that photographed, I would discover later, almost indistinguishable from white in the venue lighting. She had known what she was doing. I knew she had known because of the small, precise smile she gave me as I passed her. Not malicious, satisfied. I looked at her. I smiled. I continued down the aisle. Will sat beside his wife with an expression that was not unkind but was not present either. The expression of someone fulfilling an obligation, attending an event that required attendance rather than a wedding they were glad to be at. Kate cried during the vows. Genuinely, I think. She loved David, and she was capable of being moved. But she also cried in a way that required some management, that made itself known in the room, that pulled a small amount of attention in her direction at the moment when I was saying the most important words of my adult life. I said the words. I looked at David. I noticed all of it, and I held it, and I smiled, and I was present for my own wedding with the full attention I had promised myself I would give it, regardless of what was happening in the rows behind me. My grandmother's blessing was spoken clearly and beautifully in Tamil, and my grandmother cried while she gave it, and my parents cried watching her, and Sunita cried watching all of us, and Richard Morrison looked at his hands. We were pronounced married. David kissed me, and I heard everything. The applause, my mother's voice somewhere in the room, the sound of the moment I had been moving toward, and underneath it, very quietly, I made a decision I had been approaching for 18 months. Stop here with me for a second. I need you to feel the weight of what had happened that day before I tell you what I did with it. The mother-in-law in cream, the brother-in-law's absence in plain sight, the sister-in-law's tears at the center of a moment that was not about her. A grandmother's name misspelled in a program, 9 dinners, 18 months. None of it was violence. None of it was something you could take to court. It was the accumulation of 100 small things that, taken individually, could each be explained away and taken together, formed a portrait so clear it required no interpretation. If you have ever been the person in the room who was not quite welcomed, not quite included, not quite considered worth the full courtesy that was given to everyone else in the same space, drop a comment. Tell me you're here, because what I'm about to tell you is for you. The reception was held in the adjacent ballroom, 212 people. Dinner, a band David had found through a friend and had been quietly excited about for months, a dance floor, and a series of toasts that had been organized, at my request, with a specific structure that I had submitted to the wedding coordinator 3 weeks prior. I had made changes to that structure the evening before. At 11 p.m., sitting alone at the desk in our hotel, sweet while David slept, I had made one change to the reception program. I had added myself. The toasts were scheduled as follows: the best man, David's friend of 20 years; the maid of honor, Sunita; the father of the groom; the father of the bride. David had suggested, and I had initially agreed, that we would then move to the first dance. What I had added between the father of the bride and the first dance was a toast from the bride. This was not, I want to be clear, unusual. Brides toast at their own receptions. It is not radical or surprising. What was unusual was that no one in David's family knew I was going to do it. I had told my parents. I had told Sunita, who had looked at me for a long moment and then said, "Okay, what are you going to say?" I had told her. She had been quiet for another long moment. Then she had said, "Good." David did not know. I had made that choice carefully, not because I didn't trust him. I trusted him completely, but because I wanted what I was about to say to come from me. Not from us, not as a managed couple communication. From me, as a person who had attended 9 dinners and built a wedding and walked down an aisle and said vows and stood in a room full of people who had formed conclusions about her before she had been given a sentence. The best man toasted. Sunita toasted beautifully. She is a person who has the gift of saying exactly the right thing with precision, and she said things about David and me that made me feel genuinely seen. The father of the groom made remarks that were warm and performed and lasted 4 minutes. My father toasted in English and finished one sentence in Tamil, which made my mother cover her mouth, and the Morrison table was very still. Then the wedding coordinator caught my eye. I stood up. I did not tap my glass. I did not call for attention. I simply stood, and the room noticed and went quiet with the instinctive attention that rooms give to brides at their own receptions. I looked out at 212 people. I found Carolyn's face first. Cream dress, perfect posture, the expression of a woman waiting to see what this was. Then I spoke. I'm going to tell you as accurately as I can what I said. I did not have notes. I had spent a long time in the weeks before the wedding thinking about what I wanted to say and why. I had written things down and crossed them out. I had talked to Sunita and to my mother and once, very briefly, to my grandmother, who had listened and then said in Tamil, "Say the true thing. The rest will take care of itself." So I said the true thing. I thanked the guests for being there. I thanked the venue, the coordinator, the band. I thanked Sunita, whose eyes were already shining. I thanked my parents. I said specific things about each of them, things I had been collecting for 33 years, and my mother made a sound she tried to suppress and did not entirely succeed. I thanked my grandmother for her blessing and for flying from Chennai and for the earrings I was wearing and for being alive to see this day. I said this in Tamil first and then in English. My grandmother, in the 3rd row, pressed both hands to her heart. Then I said this. I also want to say something about David's family, because I think it's important on a day like this to be honest about what we're beginning. The room did not go quiet. It was already quiet. It went something beyond quiet, a particular kind of attention that has weight to it. I looked at Carolyn. I did not look away from her while I said the next part. Becoming part of a family is not always simple, and I think anyone who is married into a family that took time to understand them, that needed time, knows what I mean by that. David's family is a family with its own history, its own way of doing things, its own idea of what things should look like. I am not from that history. I came from somewhere else. I brought my own history with me. I paused. I have spent 18 months learning that I am welcome here. That has not always been easy, and I am not going to pretend on my wedding day in front of the people I love most that it has been. I don't think honesty is something you take a vacation from on days that are supposed to be happy. I think honesty is exactly the thing you need on the days that matter most. not a sound from 212 people. What I want to say to David's family is this: I am here. I am not going anywhere. I am going to be in your lives in the way that a family member is in a life. At the holidays, at the dinners, at the events that you cannot opt out of simply by wishing I were someone else. And I want to be in your lives with warmth and with good faith, because that is what I have been offering for 18 months, and it is what I will keep offering. Because David loves you and he is worth that to me. I let that land, but I also want you to know, I said, that I know. I have noticed everything. I have been noticing for 18 months. I have not said anything because it was not the right time. Today is the right time. And what I want to say is simply this: I see you clearly, and I hope that on this day, if you look honestly, you can also see me. I picked up my glass. To my husband, I said, who sees me, and who I am going to spend my life making sure knows that was worth it. I drank. The silence lasted another moment. Then Sunita started clapping. My parents joined her, then the rest of my side of the room. Then, slowly, with the quality of a tide turning, the rest. I sat down. David's hand found mine under the table. He didn't say anything. He didn't need to. I looked at Carolyn. She was not clapping. She was looking at her hands. Something was moving across her face that I could not name from where I was sitting. Something complicated, something that required more room than a reception hall offered. Will was looking at me with an expression I had not seen from him before. Assessment. Genuine reassessment, the look of someone encountering information that does not fit their existing model. Kate was crying again. But differently than at the ceremony, not the performed emotion, not the managed grief of someone competing for the room. She was crying the way you cry when something cuts through your own defenses without asking permission. I did not feel triumphant. I want to be precise about that because I think it matters. I had not made that toast to win something. I had not stood up to humiliate anyone or to score points or to make anyone regret what they had done, though I had spent considerable energy in the weeks of preparation, making sure I was not doing it from those places. I had stood up because I had decided the evening before my wedding that I was not going to begin my marriage by performing a contentment I did not feel, that the woman who stood at the beginning of this marriage was going to be a woman who had been honest about what the beginning had looked like. Not cruel, not accusatory, honest. There is a difference. The reception continued. The band played. David and I had our first dance, and then my father and I danced to a song my parents had danced to at their own wedding, and that was the moment I actually cried. Quietly, into my father's shoulder, while he held me the way he had when I was small. Carolyn found me near the end of the evening. I was standing at the edge of the dance floor with a glass of water, watching my grandmother be charmed by David's college roommate. She came to stand beside me. We looked at the floor together for a moment. "That was," she said, and then paused and chose her words with the precision I had observed across 18 months. "Not what I expected." "I know," I said. Another pause. "You're very direct," she said. "I am." She was quiet for a moment. I waited. "David is very happy," she said finally. The way she said it told me something. It was not an observation, it was a concession, an acknowledgement of evidence she could not dismiss. "I know," I said again. "So am I." She looked at me then, fully, directly, in a way that felt different from the measured assessments of 9 dinners, something that was, maybe, the beginning of something else. "I imagine," she said carefully, "that the next few years will be an adjustment." "For everyone," I said. She almost smiled. It was small and it was real, and I filed it away with the honesty that I try to apply to everything. It was not an apology. It was not absolution. It was not the end of anything. But it was a woman in a cream dress, looking at her son's wife and choosing, for the first time, to be direct. It was a start. Kate texted me 3 days after the wedding, a long message that began with, "I've been thinking about what you said," and ended with something I will keep private because it was offered privately and deserves to stay that way. It was the kind of message that requires courage to send, and I recognized that, and I wrote back with care. Will said nothing for 6 weeks. Then, at the first family dinner, after we returned from our honeymoon, he asked me a question about my work. A real question, with follow-up. The kind of question you ask when you are interested in the answer. It lasted 12 minutes. I counted because I am someone who counts. Richard Morrison has still not said much of anything, but he shook my hand differently the night of the reception as we were leaving. He looked at me. He said, "You have backbone." And then he walked away. I have decided to take that as a compliment. People have asked me in the months since whether I regret it, whether I wish I had stayed quiet, whether the toast was worth what it cost. The honest answer is no, but not for the reason people expect. I don't think I was brave at that reception. Bravery implies facing something you're afraid of, and I was not afraid. I had made peace with every possible outcome before I stood up. What I did was simpler than bravery. I told the truth in a room full of people who had been waiting to see what kind of woman I was. I showed them. What I know now that I didn't fully understand 18 months ago is this. The people in our lives who make us feel that we must earn our welcome, who make us work continuously to justify our presence, are not people we should be smaller for. They are people who need us to stay full size. Because smallness doesn't reassure that kind of person. It confirms their assessment. You don't disarm that by disappearing. You disarm it by being entirely, clearly, undeniably yourself and letting them figure out what to do with that. I stood at the front of a ballroom on the 14th of September, and I was entirely, clearly, undeniably myself. And 212 people watched, including a woman in a cream dress who has, in the months since, shown up at 3 dinners and called David twice to ask how I am and not just how he is. It's not everything. It's something. I'll take it. Thank you for staying with me through the whole of this. If you have ever been in a room where you had to decide whether to be quiet or be real, if you have ever smiled through something that did not deserve your smile, and then found the moment when you were done smiling, I hope this landed somewhere it was supposed to. Leave me a comment. Tell me where you are. Tell me what you thought. Tell me what you would have done. And if you want to hear the next story, it's right below. I'll see you there. One more thing, because I think it belongs here. The morning after the wedding, David and I had breakfast in our hotel suite. Room service, coffee, the specific quiet of 2 people who have just done the largest thing and are sitting with the weight of it. He asked me how I felt. I told him. Clear. I felt clear. He said, "I should have said more of it myself. Over the past 18 months, I should have said more." I looked at him across the breakfast table. This man who had told me, 4 months in, that it might be difficult, who had said something to Will about talking over me, and then more, who had chosen the marigolds. "You said enough," I said. "You always said enough. I want to say more going forward, then say more going forward." He nodded, drank his coffee. "Your toast was extraordinary," he said. "It was honest," I said. "That's all it was." He looked at me with the expression I had fallen in love with in the first place, the one that was curious and direct and fully present. "Same thing," he said. "For you, those are the same thing." He was right. They have always been the same thing for me. I'm not sure when that became unusual enough to remark on, but I'm glad he remarked on it. I'm glad I married someone who knows the difference between performance and presence, and who has always, from the very first dinner party, wanted the presence. That's what I was protecting when I stood up at that reception. Not my pride, not a point. the right to be present in my own life, in my own marriage, in the rooms I would be occupying for the rest of it. I protected it, and then I sat back down, and the band played, and my grandmother danced, and my father danced, and David danced with me in the way he dances, slightly off the beat, entirely committed, and I was entirely, completely, undeniably there. That's all I wanted, to be there. I was.